70% of our detoxing is happening actually through our breath. And so when we start to connect consciousness to that detoxification process, we start to feel very cleansed. We start to see that we're getting well, and we feel clear, and we feel peaceful. And then we can start to get into the more subtle aspects of the benefits of breathwork, the emotional, the psychological, the spiritual.
Today's Into Healing guest is Patrick Merle Sellin, a heart-centered healing artist specializing in psychosomatic therapy, psychospiritual guidance, and conscious connected breathwork. This is Into Healing, and I'm your host, Mira Kaddoura. Hi, Patrick.
Hey.
I'm grateful that you're with us today to speak about breath, which seems so wild because we breathe 1 million times a day, but most of the time we're pretty unconscious that we're breathing. It's just something that happens very naturally. So I'm really excited to be speaking to you about breath as a healing practice and really get your wisdom and your knowledge on this topic.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. So you have a background in clinical mental health and having your own psychotherapy practice. How did you end up offering breath work as a practice?
In the first 5 years or so of my psychotherapy practice, I was noticing the disparagement between people's thinking about their lives and their feeling. Their felt sense of the trust in life, or the hope that things could be different. And oftentimes there would be postures in the body, or a shallowness of breathing, or there could be different patterns that would show up. And I started to get curious about how the manifestation of the body related to healing and mental health. And so I started off doing a certification program in EMDR, which is an acronym for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So it's helping the brain start to speak in a bilateral way across the left and right hemispheres, and integrating a sense of wholeness in the psyche, so that we can start to downregulate our fear, our freeze responses, our flight responses, our fawning responses, and start to come back into a place of peace and regulation, so that we can operate from a different way. So as I practiced EMDR, I noticed that I wanted to go deeper. I wanted, I'm an ecstatic dancer from time to time, and have different embodiment practices. And it's like, man, there's so much that just comes online when we're being fluid and expressive and fully in our felt perception in our body. And EMDR just didn't seem like it was quite going deep enough into the body for me. And so I started to open myself up to the search for something. And I came to this practice called Breathwave, which is a conscious connected breathing practice that emphasizes a more gentle approach to the power of transpersonal, or like a holotropic method of breathing. We like to breathe in a way that's more peaceful and tonifying for the parasympathetic nervous system, which is where we can heal and relax into ourselves. So that's a way of coming into this practice for me.
So what is integral breath work?
Yeah. So for me, the emphasis of my master's in clinical mental health counseling was integral psychology. And so I was really in love with all the different healing modalities that were being offered to us, all the different theories and perspectives, but I wanted a way to fit them all together. And I noticed that there was just different approaches. And so integral psychology provides this map of different domains of consciousness. There's the individual healing, and there's the collective healing. There's objective healing, say, on the physical level, but then there's subjective healing on the internal level. And so bringing those 4 domains together is really the vision and the practice of integral psychology, of how is what we're talking about in session today related to your interpersonal relationships? How is that related to the systems that you exist in? How does it relate to your body? And, the experiences that are stored in your tissues. And so we move fluidly in integral psychology through those domains to integrate healing into the fullness and the wholeness of the human. And so with that perspective, I connect with people as they're experiencing their life and their challenges, and start to zoom them out into a deeper understanding of being curious about, how these symptoms or how these stories that they're focusing on in their life relate to the other aspects of healing. And one of the most fascinating parts of it is how it relates to our breath. How we breathe is how we live. And so if we have this stored resistance to releasing control, we're going to struggle releasing our out-breath, for example. So integral breathwork really brings this study of those two practices together.
Tell me a little bit more about how we breathe is how we live.
We could start from the experience of a baby, that's in training to the heartbeat of the mother. And the emotions and the experiences that the mother have are syncopating with, of course, the baby that's in the womb. And so already the neurology is starting to get wired to the experience of the mother and how she's feeling, how she's breathing. And so those patterns can start to already lay a landscape inside of our bodies and our perception. And so as we start to develop throughout life, of course, there's all these other pressures and conditions that are laid on top of us to, become who we are, to fit within society. And sometimes there's a disagreement between what might feel authentic to us and what's required for us to maintain connection or maintain, security in those primary relationships. And so there's this dissonance. And oftentimes when there's dissonance and we don't know how to move through that, we hold our breath. Or if we're afraid, we'll hold our breath. And so the emotions that might be able to flow and be felt get stuck as holding patterns in the breath. So as we start to connect our breath without a pause, we get this open feeling of life force and energy that's moving. But then what comes up is our patterns of resistance against feeling what might be there, stored in our past experience, stored in our tissues. And so we can see that and witness that as facilitators of breathwork, and offer hands-on support, offer coaching to help create some more wholesome patterns of openness and surrender to life's flow.
So powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like this oracle. Yeah. That it's an ongoing study. One of the things that we realize is that we'll never master breathwork. We're not masters of this. We're students. And it's really a masterless practice that invites relentless curiosity about how what's coming up in someone's body and what's coming up in their experience of life force moving does relate to the patterns. And so we get curious with the integral breathwork approach. We start to notice and wonder how someone's innate or subjective experience of a lot of energy moving with their breath correlates to certain emotions or to certain patterns in their life. And invite a harmonizing of what's being experienced in a peaceful, powerful breath.
And as people do this over and over again, what do you start to see happen?
Yeah, great question. I can speak for myself that my nervous system trusts me. There's almost a feeling of like a wild animal, or say I have a dog that's with me, and we kind of share our nervous systems with our pets and also with our relationships. But bringing that closer and closer and closer, there's this quality of, I know how to show up for myself now. I know how to pause and keep composure when there's a lot of energy moving through my body. And breath is just the raw experience of power or of life force or of spirit. In many faith traditions around the world, the word for breath and spirit are synonymous. And so there's this bridging of spirit and matter that we really start to open and expand our perspective of what's going on in our felt experience. And so for me, that feeling is like, I trust myself. I feel safe with myself. I know I can pause. I can respond to what's happening. I don't have to just react or defend myself. And so taking responsibility for myself, self-responsibility is a key piece to that feeling, that's an option if I want to take it.
Yeah, while you were speaking, my mother tongue's Arabic, and in Arabic, nafas is both breath and spirit.
Aha.
It's the same word for both of those things. So I was like, I
Yeah.
never really thought about that,
Yeah. And one of the fascinating things within, sciences and quantum physics is that we're starting to realize that we're energetic beings. And as we start to turn our science to the movement of energy and not just focusing on the organic or
matter.
The material aspect of things, we look into the immaterial and energetic nature of things, and we're starting to discover things that in different spiritual disciplines, there's a different way, say, of talking about it without Western science. But as we're bringing those two together, we're realizing maybe we've been talking about the same thing. And breath ends up being this mediator of experience between it. You mentioned like we're breathing all the time, but it's mostly unconscious. And so in that way, the breath can be this bridge between our conscious and our unconscious mind. And when we start to facilitate conscious connection to our breath, we're bringing a sense of unity and harmony between our conscious and unconscious experience. It's a pretty powerful dip into the, both the depths and the heights of our human condition.
Yeah. So what happens during an integral breathwork session?
Yeah. So an integral breathwork session would just be my synthesis of psychotherapy coming from an integral psychological lens with the practice of conscious connected breathing. So it would be a melding or a marriage of talk therapy and somatic experiencing through breathwork. So we might take the first 40 or 60 minutes to just connect and attune to each other and build rapport and a sense of like, you feel me, feeling you, feel
Trust.
me. And so we're building that rapport and a sense of coherence. And rather than just stopping there at the level of cognition or at the level of, our perception of what we're talking about, we'll take the rest of a session, so usually 60 minutes plus like 10 or 15 minutes for relaxation, to go into a conscious connected breathing pattern. And we do this in a very gentle and slow way. We're not looking to push the nervous system, or we're not looking to blast off into a transpersonal state per se. We find that gentleness is as powerful, if not more powerful, of an approach when it comes to healing trauma and when it comes to reconnecting with a sense of safety in our bodies. So we want to start with how we're going to end. Like ideally, we're going to feel embodied and safe and present and coherent with our needs and our own feelings. So we start that way. Let's be present with a connected breath. And there's different motions that move through. We can start to become more deeply conscious of some of the stored content or unexpressed emotions that are dictating the patterns in our life. And so as we go through those experiences in the breathwork session, we pause and then we take time to integrate and speak about how what we were just discussing in a person's life experience relates to what was just coming up in their felt perception of the breath.
What do different people come to you to basically work through in breath work or in these sessions?
Yeah, everything. Oftentimes people coming, to any kind of healing modality, but maybe particularly, psychotherapy. Psyche is dealing with the soul, and so it's this, more immaterial sense of like something's not quite right, or I'm noticing these patterns in my life and it's causing me to suffer. Maybe it has a diagnosis in their experience or in their mind as depression or anxiety, or they're aware maybe of some traumatic experiences. And so all of those would be things that people come to me for. But what we start to realize pretty quickly is that a felt connection to ourselves in a safe and, relational way starts to get the foundation of the healing started from a place of wholeness and connection to ourselves. And so that, to me, is the fundamental piece that's radically different than some modalities. People are coming for help, so there's a sense of lack. Rather than, what if we activated a sense of fullness and wholeness in your breathing and your felt perception, and then started to inquire about what needs to be healed from a place not of you asking, how can you help me, but how can I pour into my own healing? How can I contribute to the wholeness that feels lost?
There's a lot of people out there that are in the midst of living through trauma, right? Is it possible to heal when you're in the thick of it? Or does it have to be a post, do you start the healing journey after the trauma happens?
I see. Yeah, that's a good question, because these words of healing and trauma, like how we define these words, is important. So if you're in an ongoing state of trauma or being traumatized, there's a clear invitation to get to a space of safety and support, so that you're not having to mix, say, the medicine with the poison. That if, say, you're in an abusive relationship and you're trying to take care of yourself, you're circulating that new medicine through an old, container. So on one hand, coming into a more peaceful and regulated state is essential for us to start to have a new experience. And so if that's, how we understand healing, no, it's going to be very difficult to do that in the midst of, like disaster, catastrophe, externally or internally. And then at the same time, the life force or our awareness is always looking for a way to flow, much like water. It's looking for new adaptive strategies to not only survive, but ideally to thrive. And so in the genius of our consciousness and the genius of our bodies for healing, which are constantly healing, doing. So it's like this illusion of being separate from healing is part of what I like to elucidate, is that it's not that we're not already whole. We just perceive that we're not. For example, like our bodies are magnificent examples of so many different systems working in wholeness and harmony. So if we brought
every second that we don't even think about.
Right. So if we pause and breathe and start to connect with the sensation of breath moving through all of those systems that are genius and, adapted to heal themselves, guess what we're going to start to perceive? I'm capable. I'm whole. Yeah. So in that sense, I think it's a really unique way, to approach the conversation and look at our definitions of, what is healing even mean? How long is that path going to go? And all of this. So yeah, there's a lot of moving parts, I think, to that question, but I like it.
Well, if somebody were to ask you, what does healing mean? How would you answer that?
Conscious connection to our wholeness. You could just say conscious connection and fill in the blank, depending on where the attention wants to go. A conscious connection to love, a conscious connection to joy. We're not in this continual process of doing the work in healing. That would be a pretty pessimistic or futile process to spend our whole life just being in a healing process. But is there an invitation to shift our awareness into what's already working well, what's already whole, what's already intact, what's already beautiful? And so in psychotherapy, there's a huge benefit to having a relationship that feels attuned, that's someone that really feels like this person gets me, and having that attunement is something that starts to, shine like the sun on a garden, like everything that's been waiting for that presence starts to bloom, and so healing in that way is just going to be like the native species of our own soil starting to bloom and blossom and feeling the power and the beauty of participating with ourselves in, actualizing what we really are. seeing our essence manifest. And so being consciously connected to that process is a pretty beautiful healing process. But if healing process is here's everything that's wrong, and here's all the weeds in my garden and everything that's broken, and here is the disaster that, took out all my, my effort from the, years prior. There's just this feeling of, being a victim, or having to focus on other people's life, like so that victim, rescuer, persecutor drama that we can get locked in is really most of the suffering. We forget that we can create a new experience once we feel safe and supported to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting how much safety has come up in so many of these conversations. I mean, and I'm talking to very different types of people, a lot of different modalities, a lot of different experiences, but safety has come up over and over and over again.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
And I think it's also like there's a paradox there too, because deep in all of our experience, we know that we'll die someday. Is it safe to be alive if I'm going to die someday? So holding that sense is like, can we be safe from that? No. And
no, we can't be safe from death.
No. And so that exclusive identification with the body and the conditions that have already been laid down from our experience, of adapting and living in this life, the beautiful and the not so beautiful aspects of life, if those are the only way that we experience ourselves, then, we're stuck in that sense. And it's like, no, I'm actually not safe to let go of who I've been. It's got me this far, These strategies have been loyal to me. And so is it safe to lay those down and experience something new? That's like a transfiguration. That's moving from a caterpillar to a butterfly. And yeah, the caterpillar doesn't make it out alive. When it weaves the cocoon, it goes right up to its head and the head falls off. And so whatever is more innate to it is what comes out of that process. So I love that analogy for, is this a safe process? And it's like, well,
nope.
Yeah. There's safer ways, I think, to relate to the healing process and getting into a space of safety relationally and interpersonally with ourselves, getting clear about our values and getting clear about our worth and our unconditioned nature. Our worthiness and our lovability that's before we've done anything is really essential for us to set out in this process. Otherwise, we're just piling more conditions of healing or lovability onto it. If I do this, then I will be. And,
conditional.
Yeah. And that'll just keep us being consumers.
Yeah. Isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
I'm just going to buy this one thing and that'll make me feel better.
Yeah. And we do it all the time in terms of affirmation. If I could just have this exchange and get that praise, I've just kind of made a transaction, and got lifted. And it's not that those kinds of, conditional uppers, are like to be discouraged. But if it's coming from a foundation of I'm not in question about my worthiness, because that worthiness is coming from a deep connection to what I really am, then everything else just gets to be, fruit on the tree.
I love that. So how are we breathing on a daily basis?
Yeah. At about 20 or 30% of our full or actual capacity, a lot of our lung tissue is actually coming and opening through our back body. And so we're very frontal beings in our focus, right? Our eyes and our nose and our mouth are very focused forward. And so just in the breathwave practice, we lay down on the back and we come into a shavasana or into the corpse pose. And one of the beautiful things we like to cue is feeling the breath meet the contact with the ground. And so right away, we're having this feeling again of being in the womb. We're having the feeling of being cradled and supported by the mother. And we've done a 180. We've shifted our perspective about what's possible and start to breathe into actually 70% of our, our lung capacity. And we start to see that expand through our breath. So at first, to your question, it can be very minimal. It can be very restricted. It might be painful in some ways to start to breathe into the lower pelvis. Example, that would be a place that some people don't even know you can breathe. That there's diaphragms, not just here attached, at our core, but down and through our pelvis and here, and upper diaphragms of releasing and contraction and expansion that we can start to feel as we expand and pulsate the breath. And so just naturally the body can start to unfold and open and prioritize where that energy and expansion is going to go, which correlates also to emotions that we've not been feeling. Again, those ways, unexpressed emotion is one way of understanding trauma. There's just something that hasn't had the space or the freedom or the presence to feel felt yet. And so as we start to go through this process, the body's quite brilliant in how it prioritizes first the physical and, say, medical benefits of breathing in this way, oxygenating our cells and starting to detoxify. 70% of our detoxing is happening actually through our breath. And so when we start to connect consciousness to that detoxification process, we start to feel very cleansed. We start to see that we're getting well, and we feel clear and we feel peaceful. And then it starts to move, because we've done that biological process. And then we can start to get into the more subtle aspects of the benefits of breath work, the emotional, the psychological, the spiritual.
When we are breathing at that 20-30%, do you see direct relationships between that and disease and things that start to go wrong with the body?
Yeah, great. Yeah, so you can imagine if you're breathing at 20 or 30%, what's that other 80 or 70% that's not feeling the massage of the breath opening, into the organs? For example, like the heart, if you can feel your breath move from your belly all the way up into the heart, there's this filling and there's this expansion that actually comes up and massages the heart organ, and so the chemistry that begins to flow and the confidence and, the serotonin and the dopamine that get to start to come up from our digestive tract from opening into the breath become a felt perception of connection. Whoa, whatever's going down here in my gut lining is connected to this nice feeling in my heart, and so the mind is like a baby in that way and starts to perceive a new connection to possibility. And so that can be one of the ways it shows up in our life, is we just think that we're stuck. There's nothing new that's going to happen today. Nothing changes, nothing moves, but you lay down and breathe for 30 minutes with
everything changes.
yeah, with a little bit of presence, and it shifts. Yeah.
That's interesting, because you just talked about this, but what kind of breathing patterns do we usually get into that cause imbalances in the body?
Great question. Yeah, there's a lot of nuance to our breath patterns, but we do notice some core ways that we can become imbalanced in our breath. So in breath wave, again, we're lying down on our back and we're feeling this wave of breath move in a fluid way, in a connected way through the body. Some people can start to arch their back as they're doing this. They've maybe learned that they need to work hard in life to get results. And so there's just this natural, I'm really trying to push and move and come into the breath in this way. So that could be an example, holding our breath at the bottom and feeling empty longer than we'd like. Could be a very unconscious pattern, of imagine if you're not oxygenated and your cells don't have the light and the energy and the power to do their process as well, there's going to be a feeling of scarcity and a feeling of lack. You're going to be take a breath, please. And a lot of people notice this. A lot of people that come in to, my psychotherapy practice is I've noticed that my breathing is really shallow. What's going on with that? So that can correlate to a feeling of unworthiness. That one lands over and over again, that if people are resisting a really open and full breath, a really participatory inhale, that might correlate to an experience of why am I worthy of taking up this much space?
Oof.
Yeah.
Wow. How does breath work help us heal or help us in our healing?
One thing I'm experiencing right now as I breathe is the pleasure of patience. I'm just being patient with myself as I pause, like the pace of the conversation, just to see if there's something new in my heart or new in my life that would like to speak and answer that. And what was coming up with me is, man, it feels good not to be in such a rush. And we do live in a culture that is, profiting off of us rushing and being ahead of ourselves, And so there's a real undertow, a current in the pause that just is pretty luscious when we start to appreciate, that here I am. And that's key at any, point in a healing journey is not repeating the patterns of the past of, say, like an overbearing parent, or like a conditional lover, of which we all do this in certain ways. If we're not doing our self-work, we repeat these patterns and we start to project and we start to get tied up in these patterns with each other, and so what started off as, resonance or coherence with a new love or a new friend, all of a sudden we start to see our patterns show up, and it shifts, and the pendulum swings into this disappointment and this shock, and like, wow, like it's going to show up here too. And so just starting to pause before that thought happens, before putting that into the relationship, causing that person to be defensive, or me to feel righteous or whatever it would be just this like pause and be like, wow, this is tiring. I'm tired of this pattern in my life. Whoa. So just that pause and that patience can really shift what's possible within a healing journey.
How is pausing and being patient with ourselves and breathing, how does all that connect to our psyche?
Yeah. If the psyche, again, these definitions, one of the definitions of the mind I really like is that the mind is an embodied and relational process. It's not the brain, it's not a thing, it's a fluidity of embodied and relational energy flow that regulates energy and it regulates information. That's what the mind is. And so if we pause and notice what's flowing or notice what's not flowing, we have an opportunity to choose a different path. And that's fundamental to the psyche. One of the terms that we have, in clinical mental health is psychopathology, or the pathologies or diseases of the mind, or this mental disease. And I remember when I was studying in my master's program, I was looking at that word because I wasn't really satisfied with a big, thick book of diagnoses, about that. Here's all these characteristics. And I was just looking at the word and I saw psyche and I saw path. I'm like, whoa. Psychopathology is when the psyche becomes over-identified with a path. In that sense, the definition of psychopath could just be what happens when the psyche gets so deep into the extremes of identification in one way, that it loses itself and forgot that was just one path it could have taken. And so the liberation and the pause for the psyche is to then feel the open, expansive possibilities again of being a creator and a chooser of your life. Maybe I don't want to choose the paths that have been laid out before me. Maybe I want to carve a different path. And that's the sort of perception that comes from someone that knows that it's safe to risk and that this life's precious and it won't last forever. So how do you want to live it rather than following, the paths of others?
I love that. And it's making me think as we get older, we have a tendency to kind of stick to what we know or stick to what's worked or, kind of, it's almost like life has a tendency to shrink as you get older.
Uh-huh.
And everything that you're saying makes me think that no matter what age you are, there's always an opportunity for possibilities to open.
Yeah.
Maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. We aren't our age, we're our energy. And we see this, we see this in some of the elders of our community that somehow have recovered youthfulness as they've, taken off the social masks and social responsibilities. There's an innocence that starts to come back to the experience of life. And the energy being able to flow in new and novel ways and to feel and see ourselves as, stewards of that energy flow. It moves our identity from a noun to a verb. We're not nounifying everything and thinking of ourselves as static beings. But our language, the English language, is very noun-centric. Most people that didn't take like deeper grammar they would know what a noun is. It's a person, place, or a thing. Well, you've just thingified life. You've taken the butterfly and put it in a glass jar. There it is. So it's a way of treating something that's organic in a very static or, observational way. And our psyche doesn't like that. It likes to flow. It likes to feel its freedom, and that's where the clash can come, when there's sovereign and free individuals that are feeling, new possibilities of organizing themselves that don't agree with the current systems. There's a clash, and then there's power dynamics and control methods to keep people distracted. From that creator capacity within themselves that the breath teaches us. It's our source. It resources us again and again. Each breath it's doing that, but when we consciously connect with it, we start to wake up out of those patterns, see new possibilities.
I want you to explain what psyche means, because I don't know if everybody knows exactly what that term means.
Yeah, I'm saying that this interplay between consciousness and embodiment is psyche. So sentience or consciousness in a plant, would we say that it has a psyche? Probably not. Does it have sentience? Is it a living being? Absolutely. But it's having it, say as a daffodil or a snow pea or something like that. But when consciousness is concentrated inside this vessel, we experience that as psyche. It's a self-awareness. There's a unique capacity for self-awareness that's intrinsic to the psyche, that's also unique to our suffering as a member of this more than human world. We're like free radical fruiting body consciousness, the planet, that's trying to understand our place in the greater wholeness. And we're new to that conversation that has been, millions of years of process of fruiting us. And so we get to be the artists and the poets, and the ones that wax and wane between, knowing what we are and being what we are. So yeah, psyche is that unique confluence or estuary of, consciousness and humanness.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. How do we improve our relationship between our body and mind through breath?
I would say it improves.
Just as we practice.
Yeah. Every system in our body benefits and improves its function when we breathe more consciously and openly in a more peaceful way. So it's not so much about like a tool that we use as much as it's indigenous to us. Yeah, it's part of its nature to reveal our wholeness and our, this thing that's already the case. And this is key within my field, within, psychology and psychotherapy, is if we have an intrinsic sense of emptiness or of separateness or of unlovability, those things that we haven't touched are going to dictate, they're going to filter the way that we perceive the whole process. You know, and so having a practice like breath that goes right to the root of, you know, perceptual, you know, flow allows us to kind of go right to the fountainhead, right to the source, and start to commune again with that most central process. It's the first thing that we do when we're born, you know, as we're coming through. And it's also this, you know, it can be a very traumatic experience in the Western medical system. You know, there's fluorescent lights and everything, and maybe the umbilical cord is being cut too early, and we're being taken away from our mother. And so it's this crisis and it's this emergency, rather than understanding the importance of, honoring what's sacred and honoring what's essential about this process. We're pretty, you know, far removed from rituals and ceremonies that help really steward, you know, that experience of wholeness radiating out in, you know, wider and wider ways of seeing the wholeness in the rest of our life.
On your site, I read, present moment awareness can liberate old unexpressed emotions and resolve limiting beliefs about oneself. How's that?
Yeah, to think of it from outside of present moment awareness, there would be a feeling of, let's say I'm running out of time, or I'm not where I'm supposed to be, got things to do, you know, and all of those are just perpetuating the things that we've already learned. You know, it's those novelties of discovery earlier in our developmental process just get nuanced and, you know, put on adult clothes. And part of that's necessary, you know, of belonging to a society and, you know, just dealing with material life. But yeah, present moment awareness, for one, it brings us out of time, brings us into the eternal. Eternity not as like a ongoing continuation of time, but actually just now, always now. And so it starts to elucidate, what is that clock I keep looking at? What is this idea of myself I keep looking at? I didn't even know that was a thing. You know, that's part of the beauty of meditation or mindfulness practice is everything's getting stirred up, and you come back to, like, say, this glass, and you let all that's getting stirred up settle. All that sediment falls down, and your awareness has a clear vessel to look through, but the sediment's still in there. This is a difference between present moment awareness as a meditation practice and present moment awareness through conscious connected breathing. Conscious connected breathing would be like putting that glass under, you know, like a water fountain or like a faucet, and letting it fill up and churn, you know, and the glass gets full.
Some of the sediment.
And the sediment starts to go out. So then when you come to relaxation, you have a very clear vessel that's been emptied of its daily toxins. And so there's a different quality to that aspect of stillness in the breath. It's dynamic, you know, so it's powerful and different in that way, but together both become an essential practice of presencing so that we can choose again and not perpetuate the patterns of the past.
Do we need to work with somebody to actually bring more breath work into our life, or is this something that we can actually practice on our own?
No, absolutely. You can start today cultivating a pause and bringing awareness to your breath. I almost don't want to ruin the surprise, you know, of how profound that is. That if you could cultivate a practice of 20 minutes a day, you know, to lay down on your back and just be with your breath. You don't even need to connect it in any particular way or do a pranayama exercise, but just really feel and be in pause and be with your breath. New possibilities that are innate to your particular predicament start to clarify. Breath is that kind of medicine, you know, with all of the different healing modalities and also more of the plant medicines and the psychedelics and all these different approaches of shifting consciousness. The breath can shift consciousness in one slow exhale, and it's free and it's always available. It's so simple, it's insulting, you know, to our ego, and to like, it should be harder than this, and it's really not. And so it's like becoming like a little child again, and being invited into, the lap of ourselves, and getting to just pause and to feel, and the energy moves.
I love that.
Yeah. And I would like to speak another piece to that, is that while it's, if you're breathing, it's safe to say you can improve how you're breathing. So yes, just bringing consciousness and connection to what's already moving is going to be an improvement. At the same time, in the same way, say that like a woman can give birth. If you didn't have anyone to help you, can you do that? Is it advised to do that? Well, you might need to. You might be the only one that's there, And so you're going to go through the process. But is it nice to have a facilitator? Or is it nice to have a midwife, that understands the intricacies and can hold that space with reverence and remind you, of your capacity to trust yourself. This is one of the things. We have a lot of medical doctors and midwives that will come and study with us in Breathwave, and they'll be amazed that the things that we're learning to do in facilitation are on point with a more a lineage of midwifery that trusts the mother, reminds them and knows how to look into her eyes and sees you've got this. You can trust yourself. You are the science of birthing. Your body knows you can go there. It's safe to go there. So when we're in the midst of our breached emotions and we're feeling stuck and we don't, we start to back labor even within breathing, it's really helpful to have a facilitator to show us where we're getting in our own way. So.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
You say the cure for selfishness is to become more of oneself, not less. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, back to definitions. Yeah, our understanding rises and falls on definitions. And yeah, the cure for selfishness is to become more of oneself, not less, is a paradox, right? It's wait a second.
Yeah, it took me, I read it twice and I'm like,
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious how you understand it, and I'll be happy to speak to it, but where did you go with that question?
So I think when I read it, I had to read it twice, but then I understood that when I basically lean into becoming more of myself, I become more whole. And then I can see my connection to others, to myself and to others. And that actually is not selfish.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah?
I like that.
Close enough?
I like that. Yeah. There's the self that gets conditioned by its thoughts and by society, by people needing you to be something that maybe isn't coherent with how you feel. And so who that self is really a byproduct of needing to survive. So that self is going to try to get its needs met, maybe in a classically selfish way. But if by self we mean the authentic self, the unconditioned self, the one that we can truly accept and love and relax into as our own. If we discover a being that's like that, we discover that our natural tendency is to be benevolent with our love and, unique with the way that we show up and in our lives and with presence in all of our exchanges. We need more of that. The cure is an innate connection to something that's deeper than our thoughts about ourselves. So that's the cure.
I love that.
Yeah.
What does it mean to live a life of vitality?
Yeah. I like those questions following each other. Because when I think of a vital landscape, I think of a landscape that's true to itself and it's full of its native species, and everything that's happening there is just so uniquely what it is.
And there's a rhythm and it's like magic, right?
Right. And so for us in this process, do we even have a sense of what's indigenous to us? And in many ways as a globalized and commercialized and industrialized human species right now, where we're looking for ways to reconnect with our lineage, with what feels,
True to us.
Yeah, true to us. And also what's already the case in our biology and our genes, epigenetic tendencies that are coming through, that we're just, we're witnessing again that definition of psyche as consciousness and its interface with our embodiment is going to have a very unique sense of vitality. Like, why is it that I like to climb? Maybe look back in your ancestry, maybe look at the way that that you show up, and you tend to gravitate towards certain things. When you start to trust the way that you're led and trust that aliveness coming up, and you risk starting to follow that, that's vitality. Vitality becomes more and more of itself as you start to discover those innate qualities in yourself.
How does one awaken that on a regular basis?
One breath at a time. Yeah, one conscious breath at a time. And at first, you're waking up to maybe how far you are from yourself, or you have to get well enough psychologically to see how unwell you've been.
It's really powerful.
Yeah, and so at the first, it's like you're turning and you're facing your shadow, you're facing the darkest parts of your unconscious patterns and conditioning first. So, how does one start to, experience that? Well, it's an initiation. It's an initiation into your wholeness, which includes everything you left behind to become who you needed to be, or who they needed you to be. And so that first step, it can be very helpful to have a guide and to have people that have awakened certain parts of their vitality or their wholeness first, because you can borrow from that. You can resonate with that quality of like maybe I feel like I know you, but maybe what you're really starting to resonate with is you're just being yourself. I know that in me. I feel like I've felt that. I feel like I've seen this. How do we do this, And so there's this process, I think, of rearing vitality and essence up in ourselves to start to be like, I can be unique to myself and yet honor the diversity that's there. And in that, we're unified.
Patrick, is there anything else that you feel called to share that maybe we didn't cover today?
There's a lot of confusion and despair and suffering in the world, and whether we're experiencing that in an overt way in our own lives, or we're witnessing it around us or seeing it globally, there can truly be a sense of this is never going to get better. Nothing's really going to change. And my invitation would be to turn inward and give yourself an opportunity of feeling a fundamental shift in your consciousness and awakening new potential in yourself. Because if you can commit to that with yourself, quite naturally, anything you learn from that is going to be shareable. And so now we move from a place of hopelessness to the bringers of hope. And I think that experience can seem so daunting, like say world peace, it can seem so daunting, but it's like we already are peace. We can be peace personified in 5 minutes if we want to. And so what happens is we start to get serious about self-responsibility, is we start to discover all the things that were so far out of reach were right underneath our nose.
I do feel this time is quite a lot, and I don't think we've ever, I'm sure there's been a lot of this historically, but I do feel that there's something that's being intensified just because of social media and how connected we are to all the atrocities in the world. But I also do see that things are changing. How can they not be changing? Because I think people's consciousness is starting to change and shift.
Right. Yeah.
Slowly, but it is.
Yeah. I see that we've ventured so far into our separateness. Tribalism just continuing to fractal out into otherness and otherness and otherness. And developmentally, there's a genius to that, because we want to understand and differentiate ourselves. We want to experience the uniqueness of ourselves. And so maybe developmentally we've got to the place of what we can learn from our separateness. And now it's time to, reconnect, to,
Remember.
to the remembrance that separate from what? We're on the same planet, breathing the same air with the same forest of trees, that are waiting for us to be stewards of our interconnectivity. Yeah. And so very quickly it can shift when we walk away, not just from the systems and the patterns, because we're subsisting on them for survival, the food chain and turning the lights on and all these different things. But turning away starts to awaken different possibilities. And I think we're going to start to see ways that it's actually quite miraculous what happens when we return to ourselves, and not just ourselves as a separate self, but our ecological self, our species self, our more than species self, and really see the interconnectivity. The beauty of that will ripple so quickly that we'll be out of the stupor.
When we talk about this individual work, it makes me think like we have to be doing this individual work of healing and of freeing ourselves in parallel to the work in the world and changing things in the world and freeing, or the liberation work to free everyone outside in the world as well. But you said something which made me really pause, which I thought was really powerful. You said, "Is our nervous system ready for freedom?"
Yeah.
Speak to that.
Yeah. I love this question. Is our nervous system ready for freedom? We're all in agreement that there's liberation that needs to be done, but will we be able to belong to it, belong to the liberty? Are we ready for that? Do we have a sense of stability within ourselves to risk flying from the nest that has been prepared for us? So the systems of society and the systems of religion that have served their purpose for us to get to where we are might need some updating. And so those updates are neurological. The updates are societal. They're communal. And so to start with the first things first, is our nervous system ready for freedom? I mean, really, a follow-up question to that is, are you ready for paradox? Can you perceive paradox in your life? That two things can be true simultaneously that seem to cancel themselves out. Because if you can't do that, you're not free. You're choosing one truth at the expense of the other. So how are you going to be able to be free with other people that might have a different understanding of God or of truth or of freedom? How can we be in harmony if we can't perceive paradox? And so our nervous system is already capable of doing this. This is the good news, is that, we're extensions of a planetary global nervous system connected with the mycelial web, the mushroom kingdom. It's that interconnectivity and the ability to feel nurtured by all of our relations is already the case. We're already free. We just feel separate from that freedom. We feel separate from that wholeness. So, yeah, it starts with us. We're the ones we've been waiting for.
Thank you so much, Patrick.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Appreciate you.
Thank you. Appreciate this invitation. I appreciate you. Thanks for being so receptive and present with me.
You're welcome. Would you mind sharing a 5-minute breathing practice with us?
I would love to. It'd be helpful for me too, and ground in and connect with our energy. Thank you. Yeah, simply just closing the eyes and turning inwards. There's a simple invitation to bring awareness to how the breath is moving naturally. Just noticing if it's moving in and out the nose, and how it feels if you relax your jaw and begin to connect your breath in and out the mouth. Just noticing the sensation of fullness on the inhale and emptying on the exhale. Feeling the breath fill the torso like a glass of water. and draining itself back down into the earth through your seat. And you might notice as you're witnessing the flow of the breath, there might be some resistance in certain areas of your body to letting the breath fill that space. So you can notice and witness that, and if you're open, you can practice bringing presence and expansion of the breath to that area. And you might also notice that there's subtle pauses between the top and the bottom of the inhale and the exhale. And notice what shifts when you start to connect your breath without any pause. Letting the breath be circular and fluid. Noticing also the balance of opposites. The fullness of the inhale and the relaxation, the letting go of the exhale. And so as we start to bring presence to ourselves in this way, we begin to shift our brainwave states into a capacity for deeper peace and presence in the body, as well as a more expansive capacity for paradox and balance of opposites, or two truths simultaneously streaming through the body, through the breath. And so with a very simple practice of presence like this, our practice can become a felt perception of peace. Of wholeness. And from that innate sense of wholeness, we can start to perceive from wholeness. Begin to experience the emotions that come from the sensation of wholeness, like acceptance and self-love. Or an experience of power that feels like peace. And so at any given moment, we can turn our attention inwards like this and very quickly shift into a different nervous system state that supports every function, every system in the body to be in coherence. Here and now, here and nowness. Let's take a couple more rounds of breath. Communicate to your body that there's no rush to move away from this space of conscious connection. And so bringing this inner sense, or this innocence of what we really are, into the external movement of our day to all our relations. letting your eyes open naturally, their own time.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please like, subscribe, and share with a friend. You can connect with Into Healing on TikTok and Instagram for more inspirational and behind-the-scenes content, and visit our website, intohealing.com, for transcripts and other goodies. Thank you for joining us.